Good evening on this beautiful Sunday evening. I just thank each and every one of you who are listening this evening, and I thank God for you. What I want to do is I want to speak about entering the throne of grace, entering into the atmosphere of prayer, okay? And the 3 point message that I would like to present today is entering into God's presence. Two, entering the throne of grace, or what they call the mercy seat, and approaching God with confidence. And we're going to turn our books to the book of Hebrew. The book of Hebrew. What you get to say, man? Oops. Went a little bit too far. Try this. And we were going to go into the 4th chapter and verse 16. And the author here is unclear. And so I'm just going to say the author here. And he's talking to Christian Jews. And some of them were a little undecided or unclear or lacked the confidence that they needed to continue in this priestly order of Christ. And what happened was they were being persecuted. And because of this persecution, and Jesus had not returned yet, so they're like, what should we do? Because they were so used to seeing and having a visible representation or visible presence that they were able to see and follow. And when first of all, before Christ came, there's 400 years of silence. There was no word, there was no revelation. The book of Malachi was the last book, and 400 years later, this is when the new revelation comes in concerning the birth of Christ. Okay? And so now, the author here is writing to tell them to keep up the confidence. Don't let this persecution from your families, don't let this persecution from your friends, don't let this persecution from everybody who are not willing to accept this new order of things, this new priestly order. So you had to understand that it was not an easy thing for them to accept. I mean, it was, you're talking about centuries of dealing with the law of Moses, centuries of being condemned to and by the law. And so what was going on here for a lot of them was just, it was hard to believe, but it was their lack of maturity in the word, the lack of their understanding in the word, that was derailing them from the mission of this gospel call of salvation. Okay? And so the author here says in verse 16, he says, "Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." Oh, that's beautiful. See, it is so much that is historically relevant about this verse. And that if we don't understand the historical relevance of what happened in Old Testament concerning this throne of grace, this mercy, it would be hard for us to picture in our mind the reverential or the reverence that's associated with coming into the presence of God. So we have to be very careful of this in this day and time. See, we have to be very careful because, see, there's a certain preparation that's necessary when you're going into the presence of something that's so magnificent, going into the presence of something that has so much authority. Okay? See, I remember back in, I believe that was 98, and I was living in Louisville, Kentucky. And living in Louisville, Kentucky, I was working at one of those blood banks as a phlebotomist. And it was a decent job. I mean, for the lack of educational background that I had, for the lack of job experience that I had, it was not a bad job for me, and I appreciate it. And I was ingratiated by, the opportunity. But what happened was I received a phone call because a job I applied for, because my sister was working at the municipal court. And so what happened was I was I had a certain day that I had this phone interview because I was living in Louisville when I got the call. And I'm trying to figure out and rehearse in my head what I'm going to say when I have this interview. How I'm going to present myself when I have this interview. So what happened was, the day of the interview, what I did was I put on my dress slacks. I'm at home. I put on my dress slacks. I put on my white shirt. Put on a tie. Put on my suit coat. And I got dressed. Just as if I was right there in front of them having the interview. And so what happened was, I knew that if I got dressed, it would put me in the right orientation of mind. It will put me in the right mind frame. It will put me in the thought process I needed to be in order to complete this interview successfully and articulate what I needed to say proficiently, efficiently, and professionally. And so I got dressed because I knew getting dressed, it automatically going to set you in the right atmosphere. You're going to sit differently. See, you're going to sit up differently than if you're in your pajamas. If I was in my pajamas and my t-shirt and slippers, I would be slouching on the couch. Yeah, I want the job. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, man. It's cool. It's cool. Thank you. But if I'm dressed and prepared, I know I'm in the right orientation of mind. I'm in the right atmosphere. I'm setting the right atmosphere to approach someone who has the authority to determine whether or not I get a job. Okay? That makes sense? And so, now, listen. This is where I'm going with this. In the Old Testament, priests were given divine instructions to wear special spiritual clothing. Okay? And God knew that when they put on this apparel, they put on that ephod, they put on those garments with intrinsic holiness. It would set them to be in the right atmosphere to present themselves to God properly. See, priests were chosen officers with the capacity to draw near to God and minister. He alone was responsible for offering the divinely appointed sacrifices to God and for executing the different procedures and ceremonies relating to the worship of God. You ever been in a household where, and this is funny, where, yeah, the aunt is old. I'm old fashioned from the old school. I'm a 50s baby. I'm a baby boomer, and one of the relatives come over, the older relatives come over, or your parent, and certain kids in the household, they don't want touching their plate or fixing their plate or trying to prepare their plate because there was something about them that just, it didn't seem like they would take the care, be detailed, have the right consideration when it came to proper preparation of your stuff. And there's just some people, they'll just throw it any old kind of way, don't care. But you have one that meticulously set it just right for you, know how you like it, and they come in and they present it to you. Now that's the one you want to bring your food to you all the time, to bring your plate to you all the time. And I remember having my aunt sis, my mother's aunt, and I was getting her a glass of water, and I didn't think about what I was doing. It didn't make no big deal to me. But when I poured her water, and I poured it out of the faucet, I let it run. I let it waited till it get nice and clear and cold, and I presented it to her. And that was just no big deal to me. But she said, "Tony," that's what they call me, "Tony, I liked the way you did that picture." Because my aunt sis was very, very set in her ways. She had a certain chair that she sat in. She had a certain plate that she would eat out of. She had a certain spoon that you had to give her. I mean, everything had to be the way she liked it because, and since she's the one, she raised my mother, and my mother had a lot of her ways. And so, I mean, Aunt Sis was almost like someone that you honor when she comes in. And so, and that's the way it was. And so, the high priest was this chosen officer because he exhibited the right, the right qualifications to meet what God wanted in order to present a sacrifice and an offering and atonement for the people. Okay? And so the high priest wore on his garment, wore on his stole, wore on his shoulder, and on the right shoulder had 6 names of the elder sons in the tribe of Judah, in the tribe of in the tribe of Israel, in the nation of Israel, and on the left the 6 younger sons. And when the priest went inside the tabernacle or the meeting place with God, they were representing the whole Israel nation based on those sons who were the patriarchs of this priestly nation that God had chosen. And so understand this, people of God. Anything that God authorizes on earth has divine order. God will not honor, anoint, or give increase to someone or something that is operating in confusion or disorder. Where there's no order, there's no increase. 1 Corinthians tells us very specifically that God is not an author of confusion. And so, when God gives instruction, it's order and it's divine. And when something is divine, that means it's celestial, it's holy, it's saintly, and it's set apart. And so, anybody in here ever hear of the term Yom Kippur? Okay, see, Yom Kippur is a term that actually means atonement. And in the Old Testament, Yom Kippur was access to God in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle, and it was the atonement for the sins of the people, the atonement for the sins of family, the atonement for the sins of friends, the atonement for the sins of the nation of Israel. And in this place called the Holy of Holies, you had the Ark of the Covenant. And in this Ark of the Covenant were the written commandments that God gave to Israel. Okay? And these commandments, they sat inside this golden box. Okay? They sat inside this golden box. And as they sat inside this golden box, and on this lid was a golden lid. And that lid of pure gold. And that lid it covered the covenant of testimony, or the covenantal agreement, or the contract that God had with the nation of Israel. And in that contract, God stipulated, you obey me, you will have blessings. You disobey me, there will be consequences. Okay? So, obey me, and I'll reward you. Disobey me, I will punish you. And this was the agreement. So there will be no misunderstanding. The Ark of Testimony was inside this box called the mercy seat. And see, at this mercy seat, God will dispense judgment, justice, or mercy. God is a sovereign God. God determines whether or not he's going to punish. God determines whether or not he's going to bless. God determines whether or not he's going to give mercy, because it's a sovereign God. And so, on this Day of Atonement, which happened once a year, and it was a duty of the high priest. See, you had priests, and you had one high priest. And this one high priest was the only one that was able to enter into the Holy of Holies. He was the only one that was able to enter into the presence of God. And when he entered into the presence of God, what he did was he tried to atone for the sins of his family. He tried to atone for the sins of his community, his nation, and the people of Israel all together. And so when he went in trembling and with trepidation, because he didn't know what God was going to do because of the sins and the magnitude of sins that the people committed against those commandments, the Ark of the Testimony. And so now you see them going in with the right attire, with the right dress, the right things on that represent who they are to God and for God, for the purpose of God and the will of God. And so here we have the high priest. Now, it's said that in many books that I've read, that the high priest, they tied a rope around the ankle of the high priest. Some books said the rope was tied around the waist of the high priest, because see, on the attire that the high priest wore were bells. And those bells let you know when he was coming and when he was leaving. So all eyes were on this high priest once a year as they went in for the atonement, for asking forgiveness for the sins of the people, asking forgiveness for the sins of his family, asking forgiveness for his own personal sins. And so at this mercy seat, judgment was being rendered. And one of the things that the priest would do, the blood from the bullock, they'll sprinkle it 7 times on the seat right inside the throne, right inside the area, with the sitting area. They're sprinkling the blood. They're sprinkling the blood on both sides and in the front. They were sprinkling it on the curtain 7 times. Because see, 7 is the number of completion. And so what happened was, what happened was, excuse me, everybody, I have a cold. But what happened was, this blood, it was representing the blood of Christ. But God was giving them an opportunity to understand the concept. Because see, where there's no blood sacrifice, where there's no blood, there's no remission. Where there's no shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. Remission of sin means there's no forgiveness of sin. Because the first sin was covered by the blood of an animal. And this goes back to Adam and Eve. And when Adam and Eve sinned against God, or they separated themselves from God. And they hid. And they tried to cover themselves up with figs and trees and leaves. And that was not enough to cover the sin. Because see, they could not cover Adam and Eve it symbolized man trying to cover up his own sin and not adequately being able to do that. And so an animal, because now they start seeing their nakedness and the wrong things are entering into their minds because sin set in. And so now they had to be covered. And so now that covering came with the shedding the blood of an animal to cover their sins. Okay? And that's what happened. And so now, shedding of blood is the only way to forgive sin. Okay? And so now, and so now, this mercy seat represents the throne of God's judgment, okay, where divine judgment was executed. Now get this. Now, how do you enter into the presence of an almighty God? When entering God's presence, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. The right way is approaching God with a humble heart and humility. The wrong way is with a prideful heart. See, anytime you enter the presence of a king, a president, or royalty, there's a certain etiquette or formality to perform. And there's nothing casual. Understand, this is important. There is nothing casual about entering into the presence of dignitaries. See, because being casual does not acknowledge the importance or proper recognition of their role as leaders. It doesn't. It's almost a downright disrespectful. Now, listen to this. Do you know how insulting it is to disregard proper etiquette and formalities? Now, several people recently insulted Queen Elizabeth on things as simple as chewing gum in the presence of the queen, walking up to her without formally being introduced, or crossing legs in their presence. See, you're talking thousands of years. The people who lived there knew that. That was their culture. They understood that. But someone who is not from there and don't understand that, well, it's a little bit hard for them to get that understanding. Okay? So, humility and a humble spirit will cause you to respect the formalities of another nation enough to learn those basic etiquette rules, because that's why a lot of times when you're trying to meet up with different nations, when you're trying to, win their confidence, and when they see that you took the time to try to learn uh, their culture, learn about them, and even if you made a failed attempt at it, but you knew what to do, but just couldn't quite do it right, at least they know that you took the time to try to learn. Okay, and so, but pride, on the other hand, is only concerned with self-interest. It's not even concerned about whether someone was uh, uh, rubbed the wrong way rudely, whether someone was insulted, whether someone culture was, you know, was ridiculed by ignoring one of their policies or rules of etiquette. Okay, and so when people have that kind of attitude of self-indulgence, they just destroying relationships. They risk destroying family. They risk destroying even the church. Okay? So let's go to the book of Esther, first chapter. The book of Esther, first chapter. Right after Job. After Nehemiah, and just before Job, we had a book of Esther. Okay. And we're going to go with the fourth chapter. Okay. And here we go. Now, and we're going to start with the first verse. And it goes as such. It says, when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and a bitter cry. Okay. And and bitter cry, and came even before the high king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province whatsoever the king's commandment and his decree came. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute. I did something wrong. Oh, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Starting with first chapter. And we're going to go starting with chapter number 2. Or Okay, this is the story is about Vashti, and we're going to go with verse 1. It says, Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 100 years, over 107 and 20 provinces, meaning he had 127 provinces, and a province is an empire. And so, or any kind of estate that you're governing. And so he had 127 empires that he was over. This is a Ahasuerus or exorcist. Now, in the third year of his reign, he made a feast unto all the princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles of princes of provinces being before him. And when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 100 and 80 days, he had this banquet, well, these festivities going for 180 days, which is 66 months. And so now, what kings did in those days, for the most part, on many occasions, is that if they were getting ready to engage in a war or engage in a mortal conflict with another nation, they would throw these banquets to show that, hey, I can handle the hardship that this war is going to present. So I'm going to spend lavishly and show excess spending, showing that, hey, I can handle this. I got this. Nothing happened with my finance. I'm strong enough. See that wealth was um, it was symbolic of power. Okay, and so he based his